Now we would like to begin the 2020 or 2025 first public lecture hosted by the PCU-NC. And I'm a moderator for today, Nakamura, the Associate Professor of the Reckoner of the Nagasaki University. Very nice to meet you all. So this is a public lecture hosted by the PCU-NC and the researchers in the Reckoner, and we are inviting the lecturers specialized in this theme, and we are conducting this lecture. And those who have participated all the 5 lectures during the year, you will receive the certificate of the completion. So first, we would like to invite the Director Yoshida of the Reckoner to make the opening address. Good evening, everyone. The first lecture is usually greeted by the chair, Mr. Shirabe, but he is absent today, so I will give opening remarks on his behalf. So this is a commemorative moment of the 80th anniversary of the atomic bombing, and the subtitle is we would like to build a peace through the dialogue at the juncture of the 80th anniversary of the atomic bombing. And we have already set a theme for the 4 lectures scheduled for this year, centered around the dialogue. So the 5th one has not been decided yet, but maybe there will be a similar themes will be picked for the 5th one. The Reckoner itself has set up the new Tiger project or dialogue project in the new home page. And it's only presented only in Japanese, and we are preparing for the English translation so that we can connect from Nagasaki with the external world, and so that the people in Nagasaki and outside of Nagasaki can be connected. So I think the only professionals are thinking the issues is already hitting the limit. So we have to do more approach of the bottom up. So instead of just saying it for the sake of it, but I think otherwise our power of dissemination will disseminate in Nagasaki, which is only negative effects on Nagasaki and also the outside of Nagasaki. So therefore, we would like to build a lecture centered around the dialogue to facilitate that. And this is the first lecture of this year. So we invited the Professor Robin Geiss from, he is the director of the United Nations Institute for the Disarmament Research, UNIDIR, from Geneva. And we are not capable of inviting the Dr. Geiss on our own. So he, for the first time visiting Japan, that's why we asked him to stop by Nagasaki to give a lecture to us. So really appreciate his presence in here. So now we would like to invite the Dr. Geiss to give us a lecture. We are expecting you to ask a lot of active questions to him. So he is really active and the smart and energetic person. So listening to the lecture in person from him, I think that this is a very, very rare opportunity to receive a lecture from him in person. So please enjoy this evening. Thank you. Thank you very much, the Director Yoshida. Now we would like to open the floor for the lecture by Dr. Robin Geiss. And his CV is already distributed to you on page 2 of the the brochure that you have received today at the reception. So now, Dr. Geiss, floor is yours. Please join me in welcoming him with a big applause. Thank you.
Konbanwa.
Good evening.
Ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being here. And let me begin by saying that it is really a great honor to have been invited by Professor Yoshida-san to speak to you here in Nagasaki in this truly and deeply significant moment, now 80 years on from the atomic bombings of Nagasaki and Hiroshima. Sadly, all these decades later, nuclear weapons continue to cast their dark shadow over humanity. And despite much hard-won progress in past decades, today the world appears to be sleepwalking away from the once common goal of nuclear disarmament and the abolition of nuclear weapons. Now, the organizers, the Research Center for Nuclear Weapons Abolition, RECNA, here in Nagasaki, and Professor Yoshida, to whom I'm most grateful, have kindly invited me to speak on the importance of dialogue for peace and disarmament, and which I'm truly delighted to do, of course. It is a historic paradox of arms control, of diplomacy, of dialogue, that they are always needed precisely in those times when they are least likely to yield tangible results. When it's most difficult is when they're needed the most. And it seems safe to say that the international community right now finds itself at just that juncture in the current moment. We're in urgent need of dialogue and more dialogue, and yet that seems so difficult to achieve. The situation around the world is bleak, there is no doubt. Armed conflicts, confrontation, polarization between nations abound. Diplomatic dialogue, global cooperation, and international institutions, like the United Nations, meanwhile, are increasingly being undermined, and long-standing systems of global governance are coming under severe pressure and strain. With the global security environment deteriorating so rapidly, the international community really stands at a crossroads today. At no time since the height of the Cold War has the risk of nuclear weapons being used so high, and nor have the structures that are designed to prevent the use of nuclear weapons been so weak. There are currently over 100 live armed conflicts in the world today, and 1/4 of humanity lives in places that are directly affected by conflict. Global military expenditure rose to more than $2.7 trillion US, 2,700 billion US dollars in 2024, due to the steepest year-on-year increase since the end of the Cold War. And at the same time, developments in new technologies, in artificial intelligence, in quantum computing, cybersecurity, and outer space are racing ahead of regulation and could easily spiral out of control. As a result of all this, there is around the world today, I think, a pervasive sense of insecurity and uncertainty. And it's a vicious cycle because insecurity and uncertainty tend to fuel more insecurity and uncertainty. At the start of this year, 2025, the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, a non-profit organization founded by Albert Einstein and Robert Oppenheimer in 1945, set its symbolic doomsday clock to just 89 seconds before midnight. Humanity, by their reckoning, has never been closer to a self-inflicted global catastrophe than today. There are 5 There are probably more, but I will say there are 5 clear trends that tonight, at least, I would like to illustrate to show the growing existential threats to humanity and the planet, and thereby underline the importance and urgency of dialogue for peace and disarmament precisely in these challenging times. The first trend is that it currently seems that we're returning into an era of nuclear deterrence, and possibly even an era of global nuclear weapons buildup. And this current trend is discernible and is characterized by different smaller trends. On the one hand, we're seeing an uptick in inflammatory nuclear rhetoric and nuclear saber rattling. We are seeing the modernization of nuclear forces by all nuclear-armed states, including through the integration of nuclear systems into nuclear systems of new technologies like cyber, artificial intelligence, and space technologies. This clearly increases the risk of miscalculations, of accidents, and misunderstandings around particular incidents and behaviors, and could, of course, fuel escalation or things getting out of hand. We're also seeing concerning changes to nuclear doctrines in various states that are revising the circumstances in which some states would consider the use of nuclear weapons, and the trend seems to be that there is a bit of a loosening of when states would consider a nuclear weapon to be used in conflict. Last but certainly not least, today there are increased proliferation pressures. They're growing in many parts of the world as traditional concepts of nuclear sharing or so-called extended nuclear deterrence are openly called into question and are being revisited by many nations around the world. Now, the risks from nuclear weapons is the first trend. The second trend I would like to highlight is that arms control and disarmament measures are under increasing strain, as nuclear disarmament has regrettably become much less salient in security discussions, in some capitals at least, whereas nuclear deterrence appears to be returning to the fore. This, to me at least, represents a reversal of past progress. As a result of international efforts, the world's nuclear stockpiles were reduced from over 70,000 nuclear warheads in 1986 to around 12,000 nuclear warheads today. Still a huge number, but also a significant reduction over the years. A number of treaties that were indirectly or directly born out of the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis, they have for decades managed to curb the worst dangers of nuclear arms racing, and they have thereby mitigated existential threats from nuclear weapons. Chief among these treaties is, of course, the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, and bilateral arms control agreements such as New START, all of which are under growing pressure today. On 5 February 2026, the New START treaty will expire. This is the treaty that limits the number of long-range nuclear weapons the United States and Russia can deploy, and unless urgent action, time is running, unless urgent action is taken, we will be left without any binding caps on strategic nuclear arms for the first time in decades. With much of the global arms control and disarmament architecture eroding, it is vital that the United States and Russian Federation fully implement the provisions of this treaty and initiate discussions on a potential successor without any delay. The norm against nuclear testing is also fundamental and urgently needs to be defended. Any contemplation of a return to nuclear testing must be rejected, and the urgent entry into force of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty would be a most important step forward in this regard. And meanwhile, the cornerstone of the nuclear regime today, the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, continues to struggle with the weight of geopolitical differences and a lack of political leadership. These agreements long ago all provided the guardrails that have helped to stabilize and sustain global security for decades, and without them, we clearly risk drifting into dangerous, uncharted territory at a time where insecurity, volatility, uncertainty already prevail. The third trend is that incentives for restraint appear to be crumbling around the world. The conclusion of World War II saw the establishment of a remarkably enduring rules-based order, a network of international organizations and regulations shaped and enforced by powerful states, underwrote this new order after the Second World War and guided the world into a new era, an era of peace. Over the past 2 decades, this order has been weakened by shifting power dynamics, the prioritization of conflict over cooperation, prioritization of short-term interests over long-term sustainable security, and a rather lax treatment of international law by many players around the globe. In addition, there are growing doubts about the fairness, the efficacy, and the legitimacy of the rules-based system. This weakening is evident, for example, in egregious violations of human rights in recent conflicts, to such a degree that the UN Secretary General has noted that there has been no ceiling to the suffering and no bottom to the horrors in Gaza, for instance. It has also been characterized by the invasion of sovereign states in violation of the United Nations Charter and international law, or the recent use of chemical weapons, in some cases with apparent impunity. As noted by Ambassador Fernando Arias, Director General of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons have been used in Syria on multiple occasions, and victims deserve that perpetrators be brought to justice and held accountable for what they did. This general drift away from the rules-based order has also undermined the potential for broader forms of cooperation and has undermined states' collective belief that compliance with international law has reputational benefits and that remaining in good standing in the international order is a goal to be pursued by each state. In today's volatile global security context, all too often incentives to comply with international law or incentives for cooperation appear to be trumped by ostensibly more powerful disincentives to not comply with international law and deviate from the rules-based order. My fourth point is that the fourth trend that I want to describe to you is that we're seeing qualitative changes in the nature of arms racing. In the 20th century, if I can say so, arms racing was very much about destructive power, gaining firepower and increasing it beyond the limits of physics almost. And of course, this arms race for destructive power, as in Nagasaki is apparent, culminated in the invention of the atomic bomb and then later the development of hydrogen bombs, even more powerful and more destructive. That's the 20th century, and these threats are clearly with us today as nuclear weapons, as I described, are coming back to the fore. But in the 21st century, with the threat of nuclear weapons still looming, we're also seeing the advent of various new technologies, artificial intelligence perhaps as the most important militarily used technology, and we're seeing a new types of arms race which I would describe as an arms race for speed and precision in military operations. This new types of arms race has different facets, and we're trying to grapple and come to grips with all of them and to mitigate them and attenuate the risks. The first development in the 21st century is that machine war is coming. Increasingly, we're seeing drones and other uncrewed systems being used in armed conflict. If you think back 10 years ago, drone technology was still a high-end technology available just to a few large-scale military players. Today, uncrewed systems and drones are a default weapon of choice in pretty much every conflict around the world. And what we're seeing is that increasingly these weapons are becoming more and more autonomous. This doesn't happen overnight. It is a gradual process, and it is fueled by battlefield pressures and military necessities. The communication link that human-controlled drones currently have often is the neuralgic point, the weakest link of the drone, because the communication link between the operator and the drone exposes the system. And so it is, from a military perspective, almost logical that one should get rid of the communication link and have the system fly autonomously. The system flying autonomously is not such a problem, but if the system autonomously takes decisions over human life and death, that becomes a profound ethical and also legal dilemma and challenge. As this trend is accelerating currently, and probably it's already gone further than most of us would think, and we can study this in current battlefields where increasingly we can see the drones having more and more autonomous features. The urgency to act on this is clear. The United Nations Secretary General has called for a treaty on lethal autonomous weapon systems by 2026, next year. And he has stated that machines that have the power and the discretion to take human lives without human control should be prohibited by international law. A second trend that we're seeing with new technologies coming together and shaping the battlefields of the future is that the battlefields become increasingly transparent. So forget about binoculars and maps of the last century and think about satellites and fleets of drones, thousands of drones, accumulating data, gathering intelligence, and undertaking reconnaissance information. This has various effects. The battlefield becoming transparent. It's not just the battlefield, it's also the oceans that increasingly become transparent, because there's so many remote controlled systems that can now, or autonomous systems that can monitor the oceans. If the oceans can be monitored, if all submarines all of a sudden become visible in the oceans, current deterrence strategies, second strike theories become void, because so far they have been based on the assumption that the submarines can be hidden in the oceans. It is probably only within the next decade that this logic will come to an end, because the oceans will become transparent as ever more autonomous systems can monitor the oceans at all times. Now, if the battlefield becomes transparent, if all these sensors gather so much data, haystacks of data, mountains of data, then increasingly states will use artificial intelligence to analyze all this data and to act upon this data. And so we can already predict a trend that increasingly AI will support human decision-making in the military, that AI will be used to augment human decision-making in the military. And given that things will accelerate ever faster, there is competitive pressure to integrate more and more AI and get the human out of the loop so that the decision-making cycle can be faster and faster. That, of course, creates new risks for escalation, for accidents, for misreadings of what maybe the other side is doing, and should be perceived as extremely dangerous. And since currently there is a strong interest around the world to exploit this technology to see how far AI can be utilized in military decision-making, it is difficult to see where any form of restraint would come from. This is an area of deep distrust among the major powers. There is little belief in reciprocity, so each side fears that the other side will go faster, will employ more artificial intelligence in their military operations, and it's very difficult to see how to slow that process down. I see this as one of the greatest challenges for us, to invent governance structures that can help prevent artificial intelligence taking over in military decision-making on a very, very large scale. Now, given all of these different trends, the ghosts of the 20th century, nuclear weapons, hydrogen weapons, still so much in the spotlight today, so relevant, the threat so significant and urgent, and all these new tech developments, artificial intelligence in cyberspace, also outer space, not to forget. It is truly puzzling to see how quickly the lessons of the Cold War and even some lessons of the Second World War have been forgotten. And I would say the problem today is not that we don't know the solutions. We know the solutions. We know them very well. We know what needs to be done to get the world back on a more peaceful track and into a better equilibrium. The recent United Nations Pact for the Future, just as one example, which emerged from the United Nations Summit of the Future, recognizes that a world free of nuclear weapons remains a global priority for all states. It laid the groundwork to revitalize multilateralism, to recharge the Sustainable Development Goals, and to adapt the UN system to the 21st century challenges. So we do know what we need to do. The problem today really is that we're lacking political will and momentum and the ability to engage in dialogue and create the momentum to move forward on these various actions. So under the Pact for the Future, specific activities, to give you just one example, include the commitment to reaffirm our obligations under international law, including the United Nations Charter and its purposes and principles, and to take effective collective measures for the prevention and removal of threats to international peace and security, to revitalize and implement existing tools and mechanisms for the peaceful settlement of disputes. As the Pact also reaffirms, dialogue between states plays an important, if not essential role, and indeed is the very starting point for renewed momentum towards achieving all of these goals. The former German Chancellor Helmut Schmidt once said, and is known to have said, "It is better to negotiate unsuccessfully for 100 hours than to engage in 1 minute of shooting." Now that brings me to the importance of dialogue, which is of course the topic that the organizers have asked me to explore, which I want to do very much in the second half of my talk. So clearly the question is not whether the situation currently is bleak. It is dramatic, I would say, and that is clear to everyone. The issue is really, for me, how arms control, disarmament, diplomatic dialogue can help to overcome distrust and division, while at the same time being reconceptualized as integral parts and components of national and global security. One problem today, and I think this is true for national debates in Asia, in Japan, as it is for national debates in Europe, one problem today is that often arms control and disarmament are seen as antagonistic to national security and global security. States are discussing whether they need to rearm, strengthen their resilience, their defenses, and disarmament and arms control, dialogue, diplomatic dialogue, kind of fall off the cliff while they're doing it. To me, the two are complementary. Arms control, disarmament discussions serve international and national security interests. They can help to achieve sustainable long-term security, and they can certainly go hand in hand with other measures on the defense side, on the national security side. Both can be pursued simultaneously and must be pursued simultaneously, as military means alone are never the answer to lasting peace. Now, to chart a way forward, we need to consider what dialogue actually means. Dialogue between whom? Which actors do we need to involve in these kind of dialogues? What are good practices, perhaps, for effective dialogue? And where do we have to experiment a little bit to make the current dialogues more effective? The first point I would like to mention here is the importance of intergenerational dialogue. Intergenerational dialogue between the young and the not so young is not only valuable for practical mentoring, it also helps us to draw lessons from the past and avoid mistakes repeating historical mistakes that were made before. The value of intergenerational dialogue is clearly recognized in the Pact for the Future, which refers to fostering intergenerational dialogues to build stronger partnerships between individuals of different age groups, including youth, and between governments and youth. In the field of nuclear disarmament, particular dialogue between generations is crucial to ensuring continued understanding of the threat posed by nuclear weapons. In this regard, the Hibakusha, and I had the honor to meet one of them earlier today, the Hibakusha here in Japan carry the burden of this history, and for this reason have rightly been awarded the Nobel Peace Prize last year. It is our duty to remember the stories of the generation that lived through these events, sharing them through dialogue with future generations and by other means. Their experiences, the experiences of the Hibakusha, are not just personal accounts or national tragedies. They really are global lessons for all of humanity. A second, different form of dialogue, but also urgent and important, is scientific and technological dialogue, not least because rapid scientific advances can affect the governance and control of weapons of mass destruction. A worst-case scenario, to give just one example, would be the integration of artificial intelligence in nuclear early warning and in nuclear command and control structures. This, I think, clearly underlines the urgency of scientific and technological dialogue that takes into consideration expertise or new technological developments. Bringing together scientific and technical experts and diplomats can help dispel the myth about scientific and technological innovations and build a shared understanding of the potential benefits, but also the risks and policy challenges posed by these innovations. And there are many such innovations right now: hypersonic missiles, artificial intelligence, like I just said, in command and control structures, uncrewed systems, drones as delivery systems for weapons of mass destruction of all kinds, a whole range of new and very significant challenges to address. Scientific research and scientific dialogue can also help raise awareness about the catastrophic humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons. Indeed, Japan has a strong network of institutes around the country that are engaged in this vital work. The kind of awareness and knowledge that they promote is essential to inform debate and decision-making, and this approach needs to continue as the scientific methodology and approaches, of course, are changing, are improving. We have much stronger scientific and climatic modeling methodologies available today, and it is for this reason that the General Assembly just last year adopted an important resolution on nuclear war effects and scientific research. One of the areas of disarmament dialogue that UNIDIR, my organization, actively supports is the United Nations Global Dialogue on Artificial Intelligence Governance, through which governments and a wider range of relevant stakeholders come together to better understand and better harness this powerful technology, AI, for peaceful purposes. Through this initiative, though this initiative is both welcome and promising, we need similar dialogues and scientific fora on the implications of advancing and diffusing biological and chemical weapons, for instance, as well as for other new on-the-horizon technologies such as quantum computing. Now, in today's interconnected world, interface and intercultural dialogue are also of crucial importance, as are regional dialogues that my organization, again, is trying to engage in around the world. UNIDIR has been more and more involved in dialogue around regional capacity building, an area which our institute has been increasingly active in, and which helps to ensure a more secure, resilient, and inclusive future, especially also for developing states from the global majority. Crucially now for the international system, diplomatic dialogue can help to build shared understandings in a world that is so polarized and full of distrust. Diplomatic dialogue can help to build these shared understandings and foster an appreciation of the different perspectives on problems and their possible solutions. Today, several processes exist on the international level on a wide range of issues, but today in this area we're seeing that discussions are increasingly breaking down in varying ways, particularly when it comes to peace and security related dialogue. For example, dialogue on nuclear weapons among the 5 permanent members of the United Nations Security Council, China, France, Russia, the United Kingdom, and the United States, has long played a very important, crucial role in collectively addressing security challenges and enhancing mutual understanding among these nuclear powers. This dialogue increased the predictability of their interactions, and it reduced the risk of nuclear use across all scenarios that involve these countries. Today, however, dialogue on these critical issues is, and not just between the nuclear states, basically between all states, has deteriorated to a point where different actors can seem to be operating in parallel universes with very little genuine understanding of one another. And this is perhaps best described by a current climate of a dialogue of the deaf, where states and stakeholders simply don't understand or don't respect one another's concerns. Arguably, much recent nuclear disarmament discussion has been a dialogue of the deaf between what some have called the righteous abolitionists and others the dismissive realists. Dialogue between these two groups, supporters of nuclear disarmament versus supporters of nuclear deterrence, have sometimes become extremely confrontational, with each side questioning the intentions, the good faith, the realism, the legitimacy of the other. But this kind of dialogue does not really serve anyone's interests or goals. It does not contribute to reducing the eventually eliminating the fundamental challenge that nuclear weapons pose to global security, planetary health, and human well-being. Instead, this kind of corrosive, confrontational dialogue squanders energies urgently needed elsewhere. It risks undermining international institutions because it often blocks them, and hinders cooperation to reduce nuclear dangers. On the other hand, the fragmentation of relationships across the globe can also mean that we just end up with competing dialogues by coalitions of the like-minded. And this is also a trend that we see increasingly. It's much easier to discuss these sensitive issues with your friends than discussing them with your enemies. Here, in these discussions of the like-minded, participants share similar beliefs, they share similar interests or values, and they tend to operate within a kind of a bubble, detached from wider realities and from divergent perspectives that exist beyond their immediate circles. Avoiding this kind of dialogue requires careful facilitation to ensure that a range of different voices are heard. And this is not just the right thing to do, it also brings in a range of different perspectives and enables more informed conversations and ultimately favors better policy making and decision making. The UN to date remains the primary platform for these kind of inclusive dialogues that can truly include all voices, no matter how divergent they may be. Lastly, I would just say the history of arms control also demonstrates that dialogue, even when it does not lead to the negotiation and entry into force of a formal treaty or convention, can have very positive outcomes and effects. The process of discussion, the process itself, the process of dialogue between adversaries in particular, can produce achievements in transparency, each side better understanding the other, can achieve enhanced cooperation and better risk management that are not so easily captured perhaps by formal treaties. Now in 2025, the United Nations is celebrating 80 years as an essential one-of-a-kind space for advancing peace, sustainable development, and human rights, and much has been achieved over these 8 decades. As Antonio Guterres, the United Nations Secretary General, has remarked, one can draw a direct line between the creation of the United Nations and the prevention of a Third World War. But as we look in the future, it is also clear that the United Nations needs to be modernized to address 21st century challenges. There's currently a reform process ongoing to transform the United Nations into a more agile, a more data-driven, digitally innovative institution with knock-on effects also for how we engage in dialogue and disarmament discussions. In this regard, I would just point to two important trends where we probably need to improve going forward. First, states, of course, remain critical in these debates, but there is a growing need to involve non-state actors as part of a multi-sector stakeholder dialogue as well. This is particularly true when it comes to the new technologies, where it's often private actors that are operating on the front line, that are ahead in terms of innovation, and we need to find more productive ways of including them in our dialogues at the international level and among diplomats. And secondly, and along similar lines, if the United Nations is to become more relevant, more inclusive, more engaged, we will need dialogues that extend beyond governments and also the private sector and also include next generations, youth, indigenous peoples, scientists, more academic, private sector leaders, and NGOs and civil society, to name just a few. Now, today one might look at the state of world affairs and question the value of the project that is the United Nations, but I would challenge you not to. Clearly, changes within the UN system are required. New means and new methods of dialogue must be explored to enable the UN to function effectively across all these geopolitical divides. It needs to be turned into a truly inclusive platform where all voices can be heard, and a platform that is seen to deliver for the world's people and that is solving real world's problem that everyone can relate to. Addressing the huge challenges of the future, including issues related to nuclear disarmament, but also climate change, inequality, poverty, environmental degradation, cannot be achieved through isolation or even through like-minded coalitions of the willing. In this sense, as an international community, I think we're well advised if collectively we were to follow the logic of the Japanese proverb, Nanakorobi Yaoki, by falling 7 times but getting up 8, exercising perseverance and drawing on setbacks as opportunities for growth and learning going forward. In this regard, I wish the UN system and all of us every success. Arigatou gozaimasu.
Thank you very much, Dr. Geiss. Now we are going to move into a dialogue in the stage, and please allow us a few minutes to arrange the stage. So Dr. Geiss, please stay where you are on the stage. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now we're going to start a dialogue with the topic of today's lecture meet. I am Nakamura from RECNA. I have the privilege of being a partner in the dialogue. We're going to spend the next 20 minutes or so in the dialogue together with Dr. Geiss. That will be followed by the interaction with the audience through question and answers. Well, Dr. Geiss, well, a little while ago I asked him how to call him, and he said just call him Robin. So let me call him Robin. But anyway, thank you so very much for your inspiring lecture. It is 80 years after the atomic bombing of Nagasaki, Hiroshima, and also at the end of the World War II. Again, that it marks the 80th anniversary of the foundation of the United Nations. As was talked about in the lecture, we're living in a very difficult, challenging world. And effort has been continuously made over these decades to realize peace. through various ways. Although we are living in very challenging times, and yet the effort and achievement made by our fellow humanities has never been or should never be eroded. We should use it as the foundation for us to move further forward into a peace. We should use it as the light of hope. And in that sense, we feel very much privileged to have Dr. Geiss with us in Nagasaki this evening. I have prepared a few questions about dialogue, but before that, well, as I understand, this is the first visit by Dr. Geiss to be in Japan and in Nagasaki. The weather is not very kind, though, but Dr. Geiss already listened to the testimony of the hibakusha in Nagasaki. And now that you have put yourself on the soil of Nagasaki 80 years after the atomic bombing, and how do you feel? What impressions have you got at the moment?
Thank you very much, Keiko, and all of you for being here with us tonight. You know, the weather is not very kind, but I've certainly been spoiled by the kindness of the people and my hosts here in Nagasaki. Meeting for the first time a hibakusha, of course, was a deeply moving experience, as I'm sure you will understand. And in a deeply, urgent moment, and I certainly have this sense of urgency as we're dealing with all of these issues. We're kind of the frontline witnesses of the international order crumbling. Many of the treaties have broken down. And so for that reason, I clearly see the importance of preserving the memories of the hibakusha, of telling the story of Nagasaki and Hiroshima on a global scale. I can see that, so many things are happening. The world is volatile. Everything is so accelerated. People have such different priorities, are so busy in the here and now. Politics is very reactive, solving one crisis after the other. There is a real risk that some memories could be lost. There is clearly today no longer the amount of knowledge, I think, in young or interests or sense of urgency in younger generations that we had growing up in the 1970s and 1980s when the Cold War threats were still very much on our minds. So UNIDIR, the United Nations generally, we're all working hard to involve next generations, younger people in our efforts, in our research, to build new expertise, preserve old knowledge and expertise. And so in this sense, when visiting the Nagasaki Atomic Bomb Museum earlier today, of course, I can deeply relate to the mission and the undertaking of the hibakusha, first and foremost, and of Nagasaki and Nagasaki's museum here.
Well, thank you very much. And talking about young people, we have quite a few young people in the audience today. And when we were having the briefing before this, you had experienced something very unusual here in Nagasaki. You were talking about it at lunchtime, and you experienced something very unusual you have never experienced before at lunchtime.
That's a different topic. Yeah, no, indeed, no. I mean, I've been spoiled by the wonderful food here in the city, and I did indeed have my first ever sea urchin sushi, which was a very wonderful treat in, I think, a very well-known restaurant around here. So I could not only smell the sea when I got off the airplane in Nagasaki, we actually got to taste it in this wonderful restaurant.
Well, the restaurant is called Wakatakebaru, and it's the high-speed sushi bar. And he was quite surprised by that system, and as well as the taste itself. And that is the system you can enjoy only in Nagasaki. It is a kind of the cutting-edge technology of sushi serving. Well, now let me turn to the questions directly related to the lecture. In the Dr. Geiss lecture, actually reminded me a very important thing, which I want to point out in this dialogue, which is the dialogue of the deaf. Particularly, there's a group appealing the elimination of nuclear weapons. That's there on one side. But where there is also another group who are more realistic on the other side. And sometimes they conflict with each other. And in fact, including you in the audience, and that kind of dialogue of the deaf, is really something we feel very close to our hearts on a daily basis. But against that background, how can we actually promote the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons? And it's a conflict not only between individuals, but between states as well. But how can we actually sort of create a space for these two conflicting parties to meet? And the voices appealing this kind of the dialogue of death can be also observed in the relationship between the individuals and the governments as well. And when the gap between the two parties or two groups is so large, how can we still build a dialogue for communication or understanding? So from that perspective, I would like to invite Dr. Geiss to actually share more of his observation and opinions.
Yeah, I mean, you're asking the $1 million question, in a sense. And, you know, the kinds of dialogue currently where no one is listening to one another really, and where there is no compromise at the end. It's more like yelling your position rather than finding compromise often. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but it's going in that direction in a very polarized environment, of course. You know, and not just in nuclear disarmament. I think this is true for most priority issues, whether it's climate change, sustainable development goals, gender issues, you know, wherever you look, we see this polarization. So you're really asking the one big question, how can we improve the qualities of dialogue, making the system more constructive? And currently, no one seems to really have the answer how to do it, and I don't claim that we do. But what we do at UNIDIR is at least we experiment with different ways of shaping these dialogues. You know, removing diplomats maybe from the formal negotiating bodies in which they are in a more informal environment, working with hypothetical scenarios so that they don't just follow their regular speaking points when they have clear and strong positions. We're trying to be creative so that everyone just gets into a talking mode and maybe starts seeing things from a slightly different way. Inviting diplomats that no longer serve in official missions, but that have served lifelong as diplomats. They know their government's positions, but they're not legally bound to just stick to them. So we're really experimenting, trying to be creative to shape new forms of dialogue, bringing in new actors, of course. I think there is untapped potential to engage more with academia. This is something we're not currently doing enough, and so I'm very delighted that we have a cooperation agreement with RECNA here in Nagasaki, as we do with many other institutions around the world. There, UNIDIR is also really trying to be a bridge builder into the academic, non-governmental world to bring in all this untapped expertise, all with a view to hopefully creating formats that can be more productive.
Thank you very much. Yes, as you say, so you said you try and test, and in order to stand at the its entrance of this experiment, so maybe some people will give up on the this dialogue in the first place, especially not only young people, but some people are kind of the skeptical about the power of dialogue or the diplomacy, and because it's difficult to find a success case or success story of this dialogue or the diplomacy. So my question is that I think that some people are hesitant to have a dialogue. So how we can urge them to trust in the power of the dialogue?
That's another difficult question, because who wants to fall 7 times and then maybe the 8th time you get it right? Dialogue is difficult. Currently, it's clear there is a preference in many parts of the world for easy solutions, black and white, not difficult gray zones. Compromise doesn't seem very attractive just now. There is, and this is something where I think we've lost some lessons from the Cold War, the Second World War. Governments, parties, political parties seem to believe that they can go it alone, they can achieve fast results by doing so. I profoundly believe that is not the case. There is no other way than international cooperation, but international cooperation and compromise is not a seller, right? It's extremely difficult to promote these, because of course, this is arduous, it takes a lot of energy, it will often be unsuccessful, but it should also not really be a surprise that it is difficult. When we're discussing artificial intelligence or nuclear weapons, I mean, these are the top-notch security issues right now that could decide the fate of humanity, that can decide which military power is dominant in the 21st century. It's the highest kind of category of issues you could possibly discuss. Top-notch security interests involved. And if you were to discuss these issues just in the Japanese parliament, it would be extremely difficult. But at the UN, we're discussing it with 193 different states with very different cultural, religious, political backgrounds and systems and very different views on how the world should be run. Of course, it is extremely difficult. And I think sometimes we're also putting the expectations far too high for what could be achieved. We hear it all the time. The UN and the governance system is slow and technology is so fast because someone can just invent technology and then it's there. That's just not the case for, diplomatic compromise and processes. But I think we're also right now in this tech era, it's so dominated by technology, we're always looking to the next tech development and what it could do and how we can be faster and how our phones can be even more interactive. And I think we're really forgetting what it is all about. I mean, what we're really trying to create is a world for human beings that's livable for all, where we can increase happiness and well-being of the world population. We're not running after the next tech gadget. But to me, that seems to be becoming the predominant focus. And while we have been hugely innovative in technologies recently, I'm not so sure we have seen major groundbreaking innovations in culture or the social sciences or the humanities so much. And I think we're a bit out of balance in how we proceed. But just to say, it should not be a surprise that these dialogues are difficult. I can see how in this short-lived, fast-lived world, it's so much easier to promote black and white solutions and we just go for this and no matter what the other side is doing, but it will not be successful. And it is pretty clear that if we continue on this path, it will lead to escalation of some kind. I mean, there is a reason why they've set the doomsday clock to, the shortest to midnight that it has ever been. Even the Cold War, it wasn't that close to midnight as it currently is.
Thank you very much. Indeed, at the moment, everything is moving so fast. That's the world that we live in. But in what we are trying to actually create a dialogue, it seems to be standing on that opposite side. And it takes time for us to actually foster a respect for others. And sort of build a relationship with others. And that's what we are trying to do in this world of speed. And next, again related to dialogue, I see some young audiences taking a lot of notes while listening to us. And when it comes to intergenerational dialogue, is also a topic which feels very close to us ourselves in Nagasaki. And the Nobel Peace Prize was awarded to the Hidankyo, and that actually highlighted the importance of the testimonies given by hibakusha. And here in Nagasaki, there have been various kinds of initiatives put in place in order to encourage those testimonies to be passed on to the next generations. But that kind of dialogue, so to speak, is not really the interactive dialogue. It tends to be one-way sort of communication. You go there and listen to hibakusha, and it's not really the sort of active interaction between them. So when we actually focus once again the power of dialogue, especially in terms of the intergenerational dialogue, when we are engaged in the passing in the hibakusha stories to next generations, probably we can actually integrate a different approach, which in this case is the two-way communication approach or interactive communication approach in the topic. Well, Dr. Geiss also talked about the importance of intergenerational dialogue in order to build a partnership amongst the people of all different age groups. They share the common platform in a dialogue and communicate and cooperate. And that seems to be a lacking piece of the approach which has applied in Nagasaki. So dialogue, again, of course, that two-way communication. And Dr. Geiss, I would like to invite your view on this.
I mean, I cannot really speak to the Nagasaki experience too much since I've just arrived here. And I would certainly say, you know, with memories so profound and so unique as the hibakusha have, there is certainly a strong point to be made to also just listen and to try to preserve this knowledge and these memories into the future. But apart from this, the question how we shape intergenerational dialogues, what do we really mean by this is an urgent and important one. You know, it's one thing to say it, and so far, you know, there has been a bit of symbolic policy, a younger person invited on a panel so that we have that voice heard, but that's not it. That is not really, I think, the essence of intergenerational dialogue. So we have to really improve the fora and the ways we undertake these dialogues to integrate the voices in a meaningful way and not just have a young person on a panel. That's really, to me, not what we're after. You know, it could be a lot more interactive and harnessing technologies also for these types of dialogues, which I think the UN has to do a lot more than it is currently doing. It could be polling exercises. You know, technology allows to reach far larger proportions of young generations around the world. It could be harnessed a lot more to discern what trends are they most concerned about. What are the top 3 security priorities that you're thinking about? Is it nuclear weapons? I'm not so sure. Maybe in Japan, I'm quite sure it would be. But in other parts of the world, I'm very sure they wouldn't say nuclear weapons. That might be changing now as the world is turning more into conflict, confrontational. As I said, we have over 100 live conflicts in the world. Recently, we just had a military clash between 2 nuclear powers. So, you know, I think the pendulum is also swinging in a different direction, and the urgency of dealing with nuclear issues, in particular nuclear weapons, is coming back. But still, in other parts of the world, this is not the first and foremost priority security concern. It could be conventional weapons, could be small arms, which indeed currently in many conflicts are a significant killer. Explosive weapons, and could be climate change if you go elsewhere in the Pacific. But just to say, there is technological means where we could do a lot more to really go after these trends, engage in new ways of interactive polling exercises to bring the views of next generations into the processes at the UN. We should also not seek the perfect solution from the start, all or nothing. We should just do it and try and experiment more. I think we can really pride ourselves at UNIDIR that we've tried out a lot of new things. Not all of them have worked. And I think that also needs to be accepted. In such a volatile, complex environment, we need to be experimenting and be a bit more open-minded about how we could do this. I don't know the perfect answer, how to involve or to improve the quality of intergenerational dialogue, but it's certainly something we should seek, and so we should be ready and open-minded to try it out.
Thank you very much. That for 7 times and you stand up and 8 times, yes. Yeah. I would like to ask one more question. So already, within this UN frameworks, that there are many materials, tools, and the mechanisms that to be utilized by us. So it should be accessed by us more and more because it's already available, and that's what I thought. And this juncture, and there is a pact for the future he mentioned in here. That actually the one of the biggest achievement of that is that in this pact, the abolition of they reaffirmed the commitment for the abolition of the nuclear weapons, and I hear that it was a big news and success. And I don't know how many of you are aware of that. Actually, in this atomic bombed city, Nagasaki, there is a summit of the future and also the pact for the future. Not really, we are not familiar with that. And also and there is a declaration for the future generations are also announced. So they can be a very good clue for us to utilize. So we would like to get our hands on it, but we are not really familiar with that, and so I have to really learn more about that as well. So, Dr. Geiss, could you please elaborate on that point? In this very rocky path in the future, as the light of hope for the future. Could you please any proposal, a specific proposal about that of utilization of this kind of material or any scheme in the UN?
I mean, if you ask me generally about the way into the future, I think what is currently lacking in the world, in many national governments and societies, is a positive vision for the future. What do we actually want to achieve, and what are we really all working towards to? For the past 20 years, my impression very much, it's a bit of a European perspective, but I think it's universal. It seems to me that we've been dealing with so many different crises and just running after crisis in a very reactive way. I have a feeling that's true for international politics, but politics worldwide, it hasn't been particularly proactive. We had to solve the financial crisis, there were natural disasters, there were wars, and then there's always the next thing that will happen, and upheaval. And it seems to me that a lot of governance systems are stretched and somewhat exhausted. Certainly too many processes also ongoing at the UN. The complexity itself becomes stifling. If everything is so super complex, then you lose sight of the real problems that you're trying to solve. And I think we would have a clearer sight on the problems that we need to solve if we had a better, more positive vision in the future. So part of what the Pact of the Future is doing is to integrate more foresight, more anticipation of challenges to come and how we can deal with them, so that we're not surprised every time something comes around and then try to reinvent the wheel to deal with the crisis. We need to get out of this reactive mode and set us up for a more positive, constructive, proactive way of dealing with politics. I think that's a general conclusion. It's a personal conclusion, not a UN line, but that's very much my impression. And I can say for the Secretary General, for the Pact of the Future, this element of foresight is extremely important. Because as you say, technology is fast. There will be more groundbreaking technology. If quantum technology really takes off, it could throw overboard a lot of theories that we currently have about how the world and the digital world works. And I don't know when that will happen, but it could happen any time. And then again, you know, we're all in crisis mode, and maybe financial transactions are no longer secure. Crypto is no longer crypto because it becomes transparent with quantum, you know, so many things on a large scale. So the only way to really set us up and to be more resilient for changes that will surely come, and there will be more confrontation, I fear, is to be more proactively minded in our politics. As I said, the Pact of the Future, I don't blame anyone for not knowing. It's an intergovernmental process. You don't need to know it. But it does lay out in great detail a lot of good actions. So, and this is what, when I said we know what we need to do, it's not rocket science, what we need to undertake to fight climate change, to lessen the risks from nuclear weapons. It's pretty evident what we need to do. But the lack of will and momentum and how we gather that momentum again, that to me is increasingly the critical question. And I think personally, it's a personal opinion, the only way to really achieve it is if the UN also becomes more open to the wider public. The language needs to become simpler. The UN also, I think, needs to make an effort to engage wider publics. Currently, that's not the case. The UN is very much a government organization, of course, and it's meant to be, and this is where the funding is coming from. And the UN currently has a big funding crisis. But of course, the funding ultimately is Japanese taxpayers' money, and is the peoples of the world's taxpayers' money. And Japanese diplomats and politicians need to explain to the Japanese people where the money is going. And unless the UN makes an effort to better explain how it is solving everyone's problems, if the people don't know, why would they want their taxpayers' money go to an organization they don't understand? So it's to my mind, I'm a fundraiser also, so I encountered this a lot. I think there's a huge onus on the United Nations also to better explain what they're doing in simple language, no acronyms, and they're solving so many problems. But we're not talking about the success stories. It is always about, you know, how the Security Council is currently blocked in geopolitical priority decisions, and it often is. But there's so much else. It's a whole universe in the United Nations that we're not speaking about. It's very hands-on, concrete items that if the UN mentioned them and put them out in the showroom just a little more, I think a lot of people would much better understand that multilateralism still really delivers for the people around the world.
Thank you very much indeed. But this brings the dialogue session to a close, and now we're turning to that interaction together with the audience. First, I would like to invite the audience in this venue to raise questions, and then I'll take questions raised by the participant online. So would you please raise your hands if you wish to ask questions and make comments? I see one person raising his hand. Well, let me count the persons who are ready to ask questions. Then let me count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people are interested in asking questions. Why don't we take 2, 3 questions in a sum to be responded by Dr. Geiss. And please be reminded that your comments or the question will be simultaneously interpreted. Thank you very much. I am Sagara. I'm just an old man. I'm here to tell you about the possession of the nuclear weapons, and I think that that possession of nuclear weapons cannot be tolerated or accepted. But there is one example situation. Only when the UN actually exercised the utmost restraint. And the nuclear weapons should never be used upon humans. And there's a lot of debate on that nuclear-related businesses or the first strike, but eliminating all the risks of such is the true nuclear deterrence. Of course, some people support that we should not rely on nuclear deterrent. But we need to be quite clear about the definition of deterrence. I think there seems to be the multiple interpretation of what nuclear deterrence. And I support the idea that the UN is given the authority and discretion to exercise the nuclear deterrence. In the case of the use of nuclear weapons, of course, that would definitely take the large number of human lives, and that should be definitely avoided. And that is also shared in the United Nations Charter, not taking any human lives in any way, regardless of the size of the power of the nations in the world. They all share one entity to be shared, which is the United Nations. I think that's the meaning of the United Nations. Oh, let me take a second question before inviting the response by Dr. Geiss. Thank you. I'm the third-year student of the Nagasaki University. And Dr. Geiss, you actually highlighted the importance of dialogue. For example, the dialogue between Russia and Ukraine. But probably the dialogue is very difficult, knowing that the people, especially soldiers of both countries, were killed in the conflict, armed conflict. So, in a sense, this would be the dialogue, or the armed dialogue, so to speak. So can it actually become the genuine dialogue? But dialogue usually builds upon the trust. How do you think you can create that kind of a trustful or trusting environment in order to make the dialogue possible? Let me take one more question.
Thank you very much for your lecture, and I would like to ask you the thing that you mentioned in the lecture. You said that we know the solution, but the problem is lacking the political will and the momentum for the action. But I feel like the current situation, the current war, has already have some sort of the momentum. Like the Nobel Peace Prize goes to the Nihon Hidankyo, and also the doom's clock hit the 89 seconds, the closest time to the midnight, and also the nuclear threat in Russia and India, Pakistan. But like your current analysis is not enough for the momentum. So how, like, what kind of degree do you think the momentum is enough for taking an action toward the world with a nuclear weapons threat? Thank you. Sorry, I'm Kokoro Nishiyama. I'm a first year of the PhD student at Nagasaki University Graduate School. Thank you so much.
はい、ではファーストラウンドということでお願いします。
I mean, as also the Secretary General has said many, many times, we really are at a crossroads. And I do think, given the state of the world, that increasingly the realization is setting in that it cannot be continued on the current track that we're on. The UN has already said a couple of years ago, that there really is two paths for humanity. And one is the path to break through, and the other is the path to break down. Since the UN said this, we've been on the path to break down, and we've really continued an accelerated pace. So yes, you're right, I agree. I think the award of the Nobel Peace Prize sent an important signal. But at the same time, I can see how this year, it's last year, the statistics just came out there for last year, the military spending is the highest that we've ever seen. So there is conflicting trends still, and I think it'll still take some time, unfortunately, for the pendulum to swing and for everyone to realize that the current track is not a sustainable one. So I think that's where we currently stand. And then, thank you for your question. I don't think that trust and the expectation of reciprocity always are the starting point for dialogue. I hear all the time, we can't negotiate because there is no trust. But that's not really, there is no trust. That's usually when you get into peace negotiations, historically of any kind, there wasn't any trust. None at all, usually. So that can't be the barrier to even starting the dialogue. Of course, there is no trust. We should take that for granted. That's why we need to negotiate. With your best friends, you don't need to negotiate. You don't even need to start the process. But with your adversaries, you do. And I think these days it's forgotten a little bit that really the laws of war, Geneva Conventions, it was designed for wartime. And some states now, are questioning some obligations under the laws of war. And it's in a bit they say this was good in peacetime, and it looked good and it felt good to abide by these rules, but they were really designed for wartime, and this is when it matters, this is when it counts, and you need to stick to these rules. So I don't think trust, or I often hear this, we can't expect reciprocity. If we engage, for example, on artificial intelligence, if we were to conclude an agreement among states, how can we expect that the other side will abide by the agreement? And that's true, probably. If there is no trust, we can't do magic. There is no trust. But how about, what would you be ready to sign on to, even if you don't expect reciprocity? What is your red line for artificial intelligence? Where would you stop, even if the other side doesn't stop? Here's another way of asking that question. And then maybe you say, I have no limits. That would be a dramatic conclusion. I don't think many states around the world would be ready to say that. So, but if you have limits, maybe in such a difficult moment with a very new technology like artificial intelligence, but you could do the same for nuclear, if you cannot expect reciprocity, what would you be willing to put out there, to agree to? And if no one has trust, then of course we need verification regimes. This is how a lot of the arms control architecture around nuclear weapons has come about, precisely because there was no trust and no expectation of reciprocity. Otherwise you don't need verification, you can just sign a treaty. So it's a much more complex process, but we don't need to wait until we all trust each other. That is not going to happen anyway, so then we wait forever. Thank you.
一番最初の方の for the first person
For the-
about the UN
I'm not
holding nuclear weapons for the deterrence. Do you think
I'm not sure I understood everything fully from the first intervention, which was more a statement than a question. As I said, in this very moment, we're not going to get states out of their deterrence mindset just like this. And so we have to ask ourselves, how productive is it to just tell them, you have to drop deterrence? What I would say is that what I fear is happening now is that too many states fall back into kind of Cold War rationale, Second World War rationale, that deterrence is a security guarantee. I would admit deterrence can be a piece in the security puzzle, but it is by no means a security guarantee. Deterrence works until it doesn't work anymore, until it stops working. And it can work under fairly rational conditions if everyone behaves in predictable, somewhat logical ways. There were some instances in the Cold War where almost it didn't work anymore, even though we only had 2 players really to calculate with. Today, it's a multipolar world. We've talked all evening about how fast it is moving and how complex it is. So I don't believe that you can come up with a simple deterrence formula and that's the solution for everything, and certainly it is not a security guarantee. In some ways, I think we have to admit it can contribute to security, but as relying just on deterrence would be foolish. Then you're not doing the best for the security you want to achieve. So there is more, and it's a more complex puzzle. And right now, I mean, we're spending 2.7 trillion in the military globally, 2,700 billion. The budget of the United Nations is 3.5 billion. That is such a minuscule drop in the ocean and such a small investment, and yes, it often doesn't bring the results you want, but it's such a small effort to try something, to have a backstop in case deterrence doesn't work. And if I look around the world, I mean, who would have thought that we see ourselves in a global trade war where major trading powers all of a sudden have 100% plus tariffs? No one would have thought that is possible 3 months ago, because it is in no one's interest that it happens, and it has happened. So don't tell me deterrence is a security guarantee. Can be a piece in the puzzle, but it's not a guarantee.
はい、ありがとうございます。はい、ですね、会場からの質問、まだオンラインの質問も実はかなり多く。
Well, that's what it says. Many questions are coming online, but I still want to have a few more questions from the floor, and I would kindly ask you to actually simply put your questions in a simple words and precise.
Thank you for your insightful lecture today. I'm Nina Vanderveen from Nagasaki University School of Medicine. I'm also a member of the Nagasaki Youth Delegation. And you mentioned that intergenerational dialogue can prevent making the same historical mistake. And in this regard, I have a question. Actually, when we went to the third NPT PrepCon a few weeks ago, we met ambassadors from about 10 countries in the world. And we asked most of them the same question, so I would like to ask you the same one. So, what advice would you give to young peace advocates like us who wish to make a real difference in global disarmament efforts? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, my advice is to engage like you're doing, to try to find access, which can sometimes be daunting and difficult, to like the NPT. PrepCom is a very technical kind of event, but I think it is worth starting to follow early to see what is happening there, to take in a lot of information and then to question it all. That would be my real advice, and think for yourself. Don't take it all for granted. I find especially nuclear discussions are so, in a sense, closed and almost prohibitive. It is a very particular jargon, and maybe that jargon is outdated. You know, you should question that. Do we need to talk about all this terminology? And if you enter the room, you know, it feels like you have to work in the field for 20 years to understand all this complicated jargon. But at the end of the day, what problem are they really trying to solve? It's fairly straightforward. So don't be, you know, turned off put away by all the difficulties, the technicalities. Question for yourself, is all of this necessary? Is there new and fresher ways to approach the issues? So that would be my advice.
お隣の方、お願いします。できるだけ質問を短めにいただけると助かります。
So please be brief in asking questions.
Today. I'm Karin Kawagoe, and I'm a third grade of Nagasaki University students, and I major in economics, and I'm also a member of Nagasaki Youth Delegation. As an activity as a Nagasaki Youth Delegation, I have an opportunity to have a lecture from many experts, and I asked same question every time, so I want to ask a question again this time. I'm sorry, it is a very big question. Please tell your opinion why you think nuclear weapons still exist.
I'm used to big questions, but this is a difficult one. You know, I mean, they do exist, I think, because we have not reached an ideal state in international governance structures. Far from it. It's rather a crisis of international governance structures, such that states for national security interests have not been willing to give up what they see as the last resort to maintain their security and self-preservation. It is as simple as that, I think, the answer, even though it's a big question. The bigger question is probably how to motivate everyone getting out of this. But I think we have to also adopt a holistic view on this. It can only happen in a more conducive overall geopolitical and global environment. And I think now we're unfortunately on a downward spiral and turn, which we need to reverse. But when institutions like the United Nations and many other World Health Organizations and others are weakened, you know, states will increasingly rely on their national capacities and also for security. So the current trend is certainly not conducive of achieving the goal on which everyone has agreed in the Pact of the Future, that this should be a world free from nuclear weapons.
Thank you very much.
からまだお手が上がっていたんですけれど
So
も、
there was
先ほど
some
先
people
日ですね、
raising hands,
時間
but
の関係で
they
皆
are
様
because of the
司会の
interest of
時
time.
間
See,
が
I'm
遅くな
sorry.
っております。
So we are
ちょっと
running
10分
out
ほど
of
まだ
time. So
オンラインの方のご質問
since
も取っ
we
て
would
最後
like
ま
to
とめていき
entertain
た
the
いと思い
questions
ますの
from
で、どう
those
ぞ
who
ご了承
attending
いただけれ
online.
ばと
So
思います。
please
で
allow
は
me to
オ
extend the
ン
10 more
ラインの
minutes.
ご質問の
And
ですね、
the
ご紹介
question
まず私の
from the
方で
online
概要を
participants.
簡単に
So
紹
I
介
would
さ
like
せていただ
to
きます。
share with you
富永
the
さんという方からの
so
ご質問
the question from Tominaga-san. It's written in
あ
English.
の日本に関する質問で
This
す。
is a
日本
question
は
regarding
アメリカの
Japan.
傘の下に
Japan
あり
is
ます。
under the umbrella of the nuclear of the United
しかし
States.
そのアメリカ
However,
が
the
必ずしも日本を
United
取らないのではない
States
か。
it may not necessarily protect Japan. Such a skepticism is also rising.
日本の中では
And as a result,
その
some Japanese people
核に限らず
started to think that we have to strengthen our defense capability. That such voices are now heard. So if we pursue this path, there is intensification of the tension in this region. It could happen. So how, what path that Japan should take? So what is your take on that?
Well, I'm not here to advise Japan and the Japanese government on how they should do it, and I don't think it's a trend or a situation confined to Japan or Asia. Of course, there is it's a serious security situation in Asia, but Europe is the same, and almost most parts of the world find themselves in this kind of struggle currently, that they're facing increased security challenges, that they want to increase national defense. And I think, you know, that is to a degree plausible. Even the United Nations Charter admits a right to self-defense. You know, it's very realist, the United Nations Charter. Earlier it was said that the UN Charter would say you can never kill a human being. It's not that peaceful, because it realizes the realities in the world. So there is a right to self-defense even in the United Nations Charter. It is natural that states need and want to preserve themselves, their national security. This is what voters demand in any state around the world. So I think we also need to be realist and pragmatic enough to really accept that, that fact. I would just hope that in this current trend, which is really worldwide, and you can see it in the military spending figures in most states, budgets are shifting, more money is going to the military side, so a clear trend, that we don't overdo it, that we don't do it in a black and white approach, and that we don't drop you know, Japan's legacy as a nation that stands for peace and multilateral dialogue. It can be pursued simultaneously, even when you also need to think about national defense. You can be a strong advocate of international diplomacy, because, I mean, even with increased defense spending, you want to avoid conflict. This is your ultimate goal. Don't forget when you turn to defense. And I see it in Europe, I see it in my home country. You know, the mindset is shifting very clearly now to the defense side after many years of pacifism, where some states now feel we have been overly pacifistic perhaps and neglected the military side. I just would warn, let's not be too extreme in what is happening now, and let's not drop all these very useful tools and mechanisms and approaches that really don't cost much. I said the UN, 3.5 billion, nothing compared to what nuclear weapons would cost, or the 2,700 billion we're currently seeing being spent on the military. So a complementary and dual approach, and also when the threats wane away a little bit, you can increase on the diplomacy side again. That certainly is my hope, that currently we don't lose sight of this hugely important track.
ありがとうございます。そしたらオンラインからですね、
Thank you very much. Here's another question raised by a person participating online and from the university students.
西村さんという方ですね、大学3
A
年
person called Nishimura-san, and the third-year student at the university. And this person would like to pursue their academic career over to the postgraduate courses and study on that peace building and security. And also, this person is wondering how that economics or the statistics or statistic studies can contribute to these topics. That's one. Another one comes from the first-year students of the university. This person studies international law. At the moment, we have the International Court of Justice and such institute, and even they actually take actions, and things don't appear to move, and let alone improving. What is the sort of a reason of having such international such institutions like International Court of Justice?
I mean, I think the fact that the International Court of Justice is more active, has more cases these days, is also a direct effect of the Security Council being so blocked, because the General Assembly is turning more often also to the International Court of Justice. That is not a bad thing necessarily. I mean, we would all hope for the Security Council to be more able to take decisions, surely, but the fact that there's other channels in the system where things can go is generally a good thing. That the decisions of the International Court of Justice cannot be enforced per se, as the UN is not the world's policeman, doesn't have the authority nor the means to enforce the judgments as such, has always been. It's not a new insight. We just feel it more dramatically. And of course, you know, the higher the standing of international law in the view of the international community, the more states stick to international law, even when it doesn't serve their purposes. This is the thing with international law. In the last 20 years, even the states that will say at every opportunity they're fully behind international law, when it was really a concern for their national interests, they were a bit more flexible about the law. And I think this is what I mean when I say there is a lax treatment of international law by all sides. I'm not pointing the finger at anyone. This really has been pervasive. And this has brought us to where we are today, in part at least, that, you know, the authority of international law is weakened. If it was stronger, it would be so much harder to disregard a judgment from the International Court of Justice. It would be anathema, it would be a taboo. And today we've gotten used to, in a bad way, to impunity, to not following up. And you know, I don't see a huge outcry in the world if someone doesn't implement an International Court of Justice decision right away. If we can continue on this track, but it's not going to do our mutual global security any good. And there too, states have to be a little more generous. You know, there is a price to international law. It will, if you stick to it, it will not always serve your own interests. Sometimes it'll hurt, because you have to do something that politically you would rather not want to do. And I think we need to get back into this mindset. Short-sight gain is one thing, but if you want long-term stability, and my personal feeling is with all the chaos around us, and if it gets worse, there will be a longing for more stability in the world again. It will soon come for more rational decision-making, and we will turn back and focus more on international law and the slower processes. I mean, that's my hope at least. I'm an international lawyer by background, I should reveal for full transparency. Yeah. And statistics, the first question, I mean, there is absolutely a role for this. You know, as we are a think tank, a lot of the work that we do comes from the fact that we are, in a sense, a trusted source, a trusted knowledge provider. we have very different states that are stakeholders in our institute, that provide funding to our institute. It's a very colorful mix, so to say, which is excellent because that's the only way to get this credibility and legitimacy. But then, of course, we need to get our research right, to work with empirically sound methodology, and statistics can do wonders. This is a world of fake news, and I think for the United Nations, there is a significant role to maintain its reputation as a trusted source, trusted by all. That is so hard, that is so precious today. Trusted source for knowledge in this world. And so there's a great future for people who engage in statistics and empirical evidence and research.
ありがとうございました。はい、ご質問ですね、会場からもまたオンラインからもまだまだあったん
Thank
で
you
す
very
けれ
much.
ど
So
も、
we
すみま
had
せん、すで
more
に
questions
時
be
間を超過
asked,
してしま
but
いまし
we
た。
already
ちょっと
overrun the
私の
meeting
方
time.
で、
That
締めとして、若い方と思われる
we
質問を少し見せさせ
just
てい
to
ただきます
prioritize
ので、
the
皆様
questions from the younger people, please, dear, bear with me.
では、
So,
ここでですね、
and
今回このセッションというものを終わ
so
りに
now
して
we
いき
would
たい
like
と思
to
います。
close
皆
this
様どうぞ最後
session
に
and the
本日
lecture.
ご
At
講演い
the
ただきま
end,
した、
could
小栗
you
さん会議
please
室長に大きな
give the
拍手をお願いい
another
たし
round of
ま
a
す。
big applause to him? Thank you very, very much to show our appreciation.
はい。